Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the show built to distill complex sources into, well, practical and memorable knowledge. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're focusing on a single, really dense source, a paper by scientific analyst Justin Lake that's just called Disillusionment. And you brought this to us. A lot of you did, actually, because you feel this this intense frustration. It's not just day-to-day annoyance. It's deeper. It's this profound structural frustration when you look at public life, at institutions, at how society seems to work. It's like running into a wall that just shouldn't be there. So our mission today is to really get into what Lake is saying about that wall and, why paying close attention so often leads to that very specific, very heavy feeling of disillusionment.
And that feeling is the exact starting point for his whole analysis. His core argument, and it's so important we get this right up front, is that he's completely redefining the term. For Lake, disillusionment is not just disappointment. It's not a hope that failed.
Okay.
He says it is the rational recognition of structural reality.
A rational recognition. So it's a feature, not a bug of being perceptive.
Exactly. It's a perceptive response. He argues that if you are intelligent, if you are paying attention to the actual, the operating rules of modern society, that insight logically leads you to this state. The paper basically sets up the central conflict that creates our reality. It argues that the machinery of society, so institutions, public debate, professional incentives, it's all optimized for one thing.
And that's not competence.
No. It's optimized for appearance over functional competence. It systematically punishes real reflective accountability. And instead, it prefers surface-level alignment and what he calls immediate moral optics. Like just strips away all the nice language to show us what the system actually wants to achieve. And that reality is what drives a perceptive person, to despair.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because if the system is really designed this way, we need to see the blueprints. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we are going to break down Lake's argument piece by piece. We'll go from the problem to the proposed survival strategy. First, we'll define that cognitive gap he talks about, the structural problem of what he calls reactive morality.
Then we'll get into the mechanisms the system uses to maintain itself, things he calls moral camouflage and ethical gambling.
Right. And third, we'll have to tackle that really difficult idea that the system isn't broken, but is actually optimized for failure, at least failure in the way we traditionally think of it.
But functioning perfectly according to its real design.
Exactly. And then finally, we'll explore the strategy Lake suggests for the individual trying to navigate all this, the compression of purpose.
All right. Let's get into it.
So Lake's starting point. He says we have to understand that there are two totally different ways of operating morally in public life.
That's right. The first is what we kind of think should be the default, coherent principles. But the second, and this is the one he argues has taken over, is reactive morality.
Okay, so what's the real difference there? Coherent principles sounds like, having principles.
It is, but it's the coherent part that matters. It means you have an ethical framework that's internally consistent. It's rigorous.
Yeah.
It requires foresight. It demands actual intellectual work. If you're operating from coherent principles, you have to apply the same logic in different situations, even when it's uncomfortable.
You have to think about unintended consequences, way different outcomes.
Exactly. And you have to be willing to endure social discomfort for the sake of that consistency. It's slow, it's reflective, and honestly, it's often politically very inconvenient.
It demands that you actually stop and think, which, in the world we live in, feels increasingly risky.
It is. And that slow, reflective process, Lake argues, is just being systematically steamrolled by reactive morality.
And that is what, exactly?
It's alignment based on immediate stimuli. It's a reaction to external cues, narratives, performances.
So it's not coming from an internal framework. It's a response to what's happening outside of you in that moment.
Precisely. It's a very fast, often highly emotional alignment with whatever story is being pushed by the group, by the institution, by the media cycle of that hour. It completely bypasses any need for internal logic or consistency, because the main goal isn't to be right, it's to get rapid social acceptance.
Right. So one is about being consistent, and the other is about being aligned.
And Lake would say it's not just a different opinion, he says it's a different cognitive engine. Reactive morality is fast, it's binary good versus bad, ally versus enemy, and crucially, it's immediately rewarded.
That's the key, isn't it? The reward.
It is. I mean, think about it. In this incredibly complex, information-heavy world, the cognitive cost of actually thinking through something with coherent principles is very high.
It takes time and energy.
A lot of energy, But the cost of just aligning with the dominant narrative, it's almost zero. And the social reward, that feeling of belonging, of avoiding risk, that's instantaneous.
And Lake really digs into why this reactive framework has become, I think he calls it the primary social currency. He uses the term performative morality. Since the reward system, in our jobs and online, it prioritizes speed and being seen. Virtue signaling isn't some bug in the system.
No, it's the main function.
That's the main function. If you can perform your moral alignment faster and more visibly than the next person, you win. You get the social capital, even if you've done absolutely nothing to help with the actual problem.
The danger there, and Lake is very clear about this, is that when that reactive mode dominates, the entire process of making policy or changing an institution or even just public debate, it all just dissolves.
Into what?
Into an exercise in optics and emotional theater. That's his phrase. The goal changes completely. It stops being about, say, maximizing good functional outcomes for people.
And it becomes about
maximizing the appearance of righteous effort.
And this is where it starts to feel really personal for the listener. Because if you are someone who is genuinely trying to operate from coherent principle, if you're trying to solve the real problem, you find out very quickly the system isn't set up to even recognize what you're doing.
You're using the wrong currency.
Exactly. You're trying to pay with gold in a casino that only accepts plastic chips. The system rewards that quick surface-level alignment so much more efficiently than it rewards the slow, hard work of, genuine understanding or accountability.
You get the social points immediately. Real accountability can take years.
If it ever comes at all.
Which brings us to this analogy Lake uses, and it's so powerful because it just perfectly summarizes why rational arguments seem to just bounce off the structure of reactive morality.
Okay.
He says it's like trying to teach calculus to toddlers who are absolutely convinced that counting blocks is the same thing as doing addition.
Wow. Okay. Let's sit with that for a second.
Yeah. I mean, think about what that really implies. Calculus. The coherent, complex solution that requires, say, 5 logical steps. You have to define the variables, analyze the rate of change, acknowledge competing interests.
You have to see the long-term consequences, and then you synthesize a path forward.
That's the work. That is coherent principles in action. But if the audience, or the dominant way of thinking, can only process counting blocks, simple, binary good-bad, use-thumb, now-never, then your 5 steps of calculus aren't just ignored.
They're seen as hostile.
Yes. They're actively interpreted as confusing or unnecessarily complicated or even a betrayal of the simple moral truth of counting the blocks.
That's the absolute heart of the frustration, isn't it? It's not a failure of information. People have the facts. It's a failure of framework.
It is.
If you, the listener, are there trying to explain the complex equations, expecting an adult, rational conversation, you just get block counting in return.
And Lake points out that the very qualities you need for a real solution, things like reflection, patience, empathy for the other side, intellectual humility, those are all systematically suppressed by the speed required for reactive alignment.
You can't reflect if your social survival depends on aligning right now.
You literally don't have the time. And this is how the system exploits our own psychology. The impulse to align, to belong, becomes stronger than the impulse to actually understand.
And when that happens across a whole culture or inside a big institution,
problem solving is neutralized. Lake argues that so many obvious solutions, fixes that would clearly reduce harm, they fail just because they demand a level of nuance that people aren't emotionally or cognitively equipped to handle.
They can only process the simple, reactive moral stimulus.
That's it.
But I feel like I have to push back on Lake here just a little. If this is true, isn't he just basically saying that most people are irrational toddlers? Surely people can rise above block counting if the stakes are high enough, right?
He would argue that the system is specifically designed to prevent that from happening. For him, the issue isn't our inherent human capacity, it's the incentive design.
Yeah.
The system actively rewards that emotional immaturity and quick alignment, and it actively punishes the kind of reflection that leads to maturity.
So the personal realization for the listener, that structural frustration, is expecting leaders and fellow citizens to be doing calculus with you, only to discover the entire game is rigged to reward the fastest block counter.
And it becomes a structural problem because the system incentivizes the opposite of real competence.
This frustration, then, is directly proportional to how much you can see.
The more calculus you see, the more the block counting drives you mad. What Lake's paper does is it provides a kind of solace. not by offering some false hope for change, but by validating the feeling itself.
It tells you that your frustration isn't a personal failure. It's not you being too cynical.
No. It's a rational, necessary realization that your entire intellectual and moral framework is fundamentally incompatible with the system's operational incentives. You're speaking a language the machine was designed to ignore.
So if that first part establishes the cognitive landscape, this reactive morality that makes real reform almost impossible, that leads us right into Section 2, how the system actually exploits and maintains this state of being.
Yes, he moves from diagnosis to mechanism. He argues that this dynamic inevitably forces systems to become entrenched in two things: fear and spectacle.
Okay, let's talk about the fear part.
Mm.
What's the true cost of not aligning?
Well, if moral performance is the main way to get rewarded, professionally and socially, then the single biggest risk you can take isn't being incompetent.
It's being morally misaligned.
Exactly. Lake spends a lot of time on this idea that people, especially in big organizations, will almost always choose simple inertia over any kind of risky action. And why?
Because the potential cost of messing up your moral brand, getting judged, canceled, publicly shamed, is so much higher than the cost of just doing nothing.
It's exponentially higher than the cost of mediocrity. The outcome of this is a kind of insidious natural selection.
Meaning what survives and gets praise or funding isn't what actually works.
It's what looks morally pure on the surface,
Yeah.
a policy that's ethically correct but is messy to explain to the public. That gets killed in committee.
But a policy that's deeply flawed, yet presents this flawless moral spectacle.
It gets rewarded. It gets entrenched. The entire focus of the institution shifts away from achieving its stated goals and towards managing its narrative and its image.
It sounds incredibly cynical, but if you accept his premise, it explains so much. It explains why you see these huge companies pouring millions into PR campaigns about some marginal ethical good they're doing, rather than fixing a core visible failure in their actual product or service.
And that brings us to the strategic games he says these institutions play. Specifically, he names two of them: moral camouflage and ethical gambling.
Let's unpack moral camouflage first. He defines this as, what? Using a manufactured image of virtue to justify something controversial.
Or, more often, to shield unethical practices from ever being scrutinized in the first place. It's a deliberate deflection strategy.
Can you give us an example of how that might work?
Sure. Imagine a big financial institution. And let's say they're facing a massive systemic failure, like widespread discriminatory lending practices that are hurting thousands of people.
Okay.
Now, addressing that structural rot, firing executives, rewriting the code, paying reparations, that's slow, it's expensive, and it's messy. It's bad for the brand.
Right.
So Lake says the camouflage response is to immediately launch a highly visible, emotionally charged, and totally unrelated campaign. For example, sponsoring a huge public service announcement on, say, environmental sustainability, or donating millions to some popular social cause.
So the virtue they're displaying in this new campaign acts as a shield.
It's the shield. It lets the institution signal to everyone, look, fundamentally, we are good people. And the implication is that, therefore, this criticism about our lending practices must be overblown or malicious or just a misunderstanding.
It weaponizes the public's reactive morality. We're trained to see the positive spectacle and align with that, so we get distracted from the actual structural failure.
And Lake is clear, this isn't just hypocrisy. It's a calculated, strategic part of how you maintain control and reputation in a world that runs on optics.
The terrifying part of this, as he lays it out, is that the better the camouflage works, the deeper the rot underneath can grow. Because the incentive for the institution isn't to fix the problem anymore.
No, the incentive is to turn up the volume and the reach of the moral spectacle. The institution becomes an expert in narrative management, not incompetence.
Okay, so that's moral camouflage. Let's move to the other mechanism he identifies. What does he call it? Ethical gambling.
Yes, ethical gambling. This one suggests a really profound lack of respect from institutions for the public's intelligence.
What does he mean by it?
Lake describes it as the system constantly testing people's ethical boundaries. It's gambling. It's seeing how much moral flexibility exists before backlash and then adjusting its level of control based on the results.
So it's like a slow, creeping erosion of principles.
Think about something like privacy rights or due process. An institution or a government agency will propose a major shift, a big boundary push, Let's say a huge increase in data collection or a reduction in oversight.
And then they just wait and see what happens.
That's the first roll of the dice. If the public reaction is quiet, or if the opposition can be reframed using moral camouflage, by arguing the new measure is for public safety or equity, then the boundary is permanently moved. It becomes the new normal.
And if there is a huge backlash?
Then they pull back, but only slightly. They issue a very performative apology about missteps and learning and growing, but, and this is the crucial part Lake emphasizes, they've now successfully mapped the terrain. They know exactly where the public's red line is for now.
So the next time, they'll just push on a boundary right next to it, but maybe a little softer.
It's a continuous, calculated erosion of principles, and it's all based on testing the public's ability to maintain sustained ethical resistance.
And the result of all this manipulation, the camouflage, the gambling, is that real accountability just sort of evaporates.
Of course. I mean, if perception can be a substitute for principle, if the appearance of justice is enough to satisfy that reactive moral framework, why would any organization go through the massive effort and expense of actual root cause accountability?
The return on investment for PR and optics is just so much higher than the return on investment for actual reform.
The public is basically conditioned to engage in this superficial moral signaling, which drains their energy for sustained, coherent political action.
While the people in power realize that these strategic moral games are often the only tools they actually need to survive their own failures.
But the real pain point here, the reason you, the listener, feel this so deeply, is what this means for the genuinely principled person.
Right. Lake says they are penalized by comparison.
They are. They're slower because they need time to reflect. They're more cautious because they actually value consistency. They are less rewarded because their sincerity just doesn't have that instantaneous, attention-grabbing flash of a performative spectacle.
It's like they're playing chess.
In a system that only rewards the loudest person in a boxing match. The disillusionment gets so much deeper when you finally realize that social moral reasoning is often just a game of strategy.
And in that game, your sincerity and your integrity aren't assets.
No. They are structural liabilities in the race for influence and self-preservation. You shift from hoping the truth will win out to realizing the entire system is designed to make truth irrelevant compared to the moral show.
And that leads us to the bleakest but maybe the most powerful part of Lake's analysis, Section 3.
Right. This is where he forces us to completely reframe how we think about dysfunction. We tend to look at institutional incompetence or corruption or injustice, and we say, the system is broken.
Which feels right. It feels emotionally correct.
It does. But Lake insists that conclusion is structurally wrong, he says. The system is functioning exactly as it was designed.
That's a huge distinction to make.
It's everything, because if a system is just broken, it implies that there was a better functional state that we could, repair our way back to.
But Lake is saying that this current state is the optimal function based on its real design goals.
Exactly. So we have to stop looking at the stated goals and identify the true underlying design objectives.
So if the system isn't designed for things like justice or competence, what is it designed to maximize?
According to Lake, it's designed for three main things. First, to maximize bureaucratic self-perpetuation. The institution's prime directive is to ensure its own survival and expansion regardless of its outcomes.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second?
Second, to maximize the maintenance of elite political and economic relationships, keeping the network of power intact.
And third?
And third, to optimize for the efficient neutralization of any external scrutiny, using all the mechanisms we just talked about: optics, camouflage, and reactive moral signaling.
So if those are the actual design goals, then things like competence and accountability become, well, secondary, or even hostile to the main objectives.
They become threats. An official who pushes for deep, costly reform is working against the goal of bureaucratic self-perpetuation. An executive who values complex truth over simple, clean messaging is working against the goal of neutralizing scrutiny with optics.
And the system just efficiently pushes those people out.
It's structural maintenance, not a malfunction.
That distinction changes everything. If it were broken, we could try to fix it.
Right, we could invest our energy in repair. But if it's designed to work this way, if accountability is seen as an external attack, not an internal goal, then trying to fix it using the system's own rules.
Participating in its debates, aligning with its performative morality.
It becomes a form of self-sabotage. You're using the wrong tools for a job that doesn't even exist.
And that realization is what triggers what Lake calls the hollowing effect. This is the moment, he says, that the perceptive person finally sees through the funhouse of incentive loops, PR, and inertia.
It's when all those grand, optimistic stories we're fed about purpose and destiny and mission statements, whether from a corporation or a government, they just evaporate.
You realize the stated purpose was just a marketing slogan, and the actual purpose is survival and optics.
I think we can all recognize that feeling, that emotional weight. Lake describes it not just as disappointment, but as the moment you realize you're trapped inside a system that literally shrugs at its own failures.
Because accountability is always deferred, and optics are always the priority, even major catastrophes, social, economic, environmental, they're not learning experiences.
No, they're just absorbed, they're reframed, and they're usually followed by a massive burst of performative morality to mask the structural rot. More noise, no signal.
And Lake points to one of the most painful signs that this hollowing has occurred: the silence.
The silence is the loudest testimony. When the people who are supposed to speak up, your colleagues, your leaders, the public intellectuals who claim to care so deeply about the principles at stake, when they all stay quiet, because the personal risk of moral misalignment is just too high.
It confirms everything.
It confirms the structural reality that silence proves that self-preservation and alignment have won out over coherent principle. The soul of the institution, if it ever had one, is gone.
Which brings us right back, with so much more weight now, to his core thesis, the rationality of disillusionment.
Yes. He stresses that this deep, systemic reaction isn't you being petty or overdramatic. It's the inevitable result of critical perception hitting the design limits of the structure.
It's what happens when someone who is intelligent, who is perceptive, who is actually invested in outcomes,
Hits the limits of a system designed to reward the complete opposite. A system designed to reward superficiality, inaction, and noise.
and he connects this directly to just how much information we're all processing now.
He says disillusionment comes from paying too much attention for too long. You start to see the patterns. They're predictable.
The apathy, the performative outrage that just vanishes the second it becomes inconvenient or costs money.
The consistent priority given to spectacle over substance. You finally realize that your serious concern, your coherent principles, they never matter to the external system at all, because the system is transactional. It's designed to preserve itself, not to serve some abstract ideal.
It's the realization that the grand promises weren't necessarily malicious lies.
No, they were necessary camouflage for the real functional goal.
So if this is the reality, if this machine is inescapable and it's functioning perfectly according to its own terrible rules, then the only question left is, how does a perceptive person avoid being completely crushed by knowing all this?
And that is the pivot point of the entire paper. Lake forces the reader to accept that relying on any of these external systems for moral guidance or for validation is just a losing strategy.
If the system is optimized to create your frustration, you have to redefine where you're looking for meaning.
Exactly. The answer, for him, isn't in some external victory. It's in radically redefining your internal purpose.
Okay, so let's unpack this survival strategy. If we accept his whole analysis, that the system is hollow and working as intended, that improvement is functionally impossible, what is the rational, non-cynical path forward?
Lake is very clear about this. The strategy is not some grand revolutionary fix. It is an existential reduction.
A reduction, meaning what?
Meaning endurance, stripped of all romanticism, becomes the primary metric of success. This means you have to stop fighting the system on its own terms, the optics, the spectacle, the emotional engagement, and you have to focus ruthlessly on what actually survives the scrutiny of this intense disillusionment.
What's left when all the PR has evaporated?
This is where he introduces the concept of the compression of purpose. He says the individual has to consciously strip their purpose down to its bone frame.
So all those abstract, culturally reinforced ideas about changing the world or serving the greater good,
They get discarded because you've just realized they were hollow PR slogans for the machine. What's left has to be immediate, tangible, and real.
and he identifies 3 core mechanics of life that make up this rational, compressed purpose. Things that are immune to all the camouflage and the gambling.
Yes, 3 things. Number 1, stay alive. Survival is the non-negotiable prerequisite for everything else.
Simple enough.
Number 2, protect the people who matter, your loved ones. This becomes the core, tangible anchor for immediate, real, ethical action.
And number 3,
Navigate the absurdity without letting it hollow you out. This is about maintaining your internal integrity and clarity against the constant, overwhelming pressure of the spectacle.
okay, but I have to challenge this because it sounds bleak. If Lake is telling us to just shrink our purpose down to our own survival and our immediate family, isn't he basically just advocating for isolation, for
Oh,
cynicism, for giving up on any kind of collective good? Isn't compression of purpose just a fancy intellectual term for structured fatalism?
he anticipates that exact critique, and he would argue it's not fatalism, it's rational adaptation.
How so?
He says that continuing to pour your finite energy and your integrity into systems that are actively designed to neutralize your efforts isn't heroic, it's self-destructive.
So the compression is a defensive move.
It's a necessary move to conserve your most valuable resources, your energy, your sanity, your integrity. You can't change a system whose very foundations are optimized against your values, but you can prevent that system from destroying your internal coherence.
Oh.
And he also challenges this romantic idea that serving the greater good has to mean engaging with these big public spectacles. He stresses that the purpose of protecting your loved ones and maintaining your integrity is, in fact, the only type of purpose that actually survives this level of scrutiny.
Because the results are real.
They're real, they're measurable, and they are completely immune to the hollowing effect of institutional PR. A small, tangible act of supporting someone close to you is inherently more valuable than the grand, abstract gesture of aligning with some distant performative movement.
That really reframes the whole definition of success, doesn't it? It moves it completely away from any kind of external validation.
Entirely. If the external world is a transactional machine, then your internal life becomes the last domain where principle can actually exist.
So finding clarity in that small, defined space, existing for moments of real insight, real connection, intellectual honesty, that becomes the anchor.
Those are moments that exist completely outside the incentive structure of the machine. Your primary focus has to shift from, say, political engagement to intellectual and ethical self-defense.
And the final metric of this compressed purpose is just maintaining some measure of integrity in a world that doesn't reward it.
Yes. It's about choosing to act on your coherent principles within your own domain, even when the external world won't notice or care.
It's about recognizing the structural limits, that the external world prioritizes spectacle, and using that knowledge to protect your own moral reasoning internally.
If you spend all your energy fighting the calculus of a system that only rewards block counting, you will burn out. It's inevitable.
But if you accept the structural reality,
You conserve that energy. And you get to choose where to deploy your limited integrity for tangible, non-performative results. Endurance, Lake concludes, isn't defeat. It's the conscious, rational choice to define success on terms that the hollow machine can never contaminate.
it's about prioritizing depth over display. Wow, that was a rigorous and, frankly, pretty sobering deep dive into Justin Lake's Disillusionment. Let's try to synthesize the key takeaways for you, our listener, who brought this to us. So first, Lake completely reframed our understanding of the word itself. Disillusionment isn't weakness. It's not just disappointment.
No, it's the awareness that our social and institutional systems aren't just accidentally failing. They're structurally optimized to reward appearance and optics over functional competence. It's a rational insight.
Second, we detailed the mechanisms of that system. Reactive morality replaces the hard work of having principles.
And things like performance, moral camouflage, and ethical gambling are not bugs in the system. They're features. They're designed to maintain control, manage perception, and put off real accountability forever. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed.
And finally, Lake gives us the only rational response to seeing this reality. A strategy of existential reduction, a compression of purpose.
When that systemic hope evaporates, your focus has to shift to personal endurance, internal integrity, and very selective engagement. Purpose gets compressed down to survival, the genuine care of your loved ones, and protecting your own moral coherence.
You essentially step away from the calculus versus block counting argument entirely.
So what does all this mean for you, navigating your day-to-day life? If you have felt this profound structural disillusionment, Lake's work is basically offering a diagnosis that validates your pain. Your feeling is a sign of acute critical perception. It's not a personal deficiency. It forces you to get clear on the real terrain of human action and survival by recognizing what is tangible and meaningful versus what is just noise, PR, and spectacle. It's a harsh realization, for sure, but it can also be an empowering one because it tells you exactly where your energy should rationally be spent and where it is, right now, probably being wasted.
A final thought for you to mull over as you navigate the funhouse of incentive loops this week. If the systems around us really are designed to neutralize complexity and reward performance, What is one small, tangible action focused entirely on protecting those you love and maintaining your own deeply held integrity that you can take this week that completely ignores the reward structure of performative optics? Choose depth over display. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.